Hi, I'm Joe Graydon.
I'm Terry Graydon. Welcome to this podcast of the People's Pharmacy, where we bring you the stories behind the health headlines.
This podcast is brought to you by Redix Industries, makers of Utterly Smooth Body Cream. 800-345-7339, on the web at uttercream.com. People who can't tolerate statins may try red yeast rice. Research suggests that some brands may not be reliable. How can you tell? This is the People's Pharmacy with Terry and Joe Graydon.
A recent study compared simvastatin with red yeast rice. The natural product was comparable to the statin for controlling cholesterol. It was less likely to trigger side effects, but selecting an over-the-counter supplement can be a challenge.
The hygiene hypothesis holds that exposure to pets and farm animals early in life can help train the immune system. Are there advantages to having a dog in the home during a baby's first year?
Coming up on the People's Pharmacy, we welcome your questions and stories about the health news that matters to you.
First, this news.
In the People's Pharmacy health headlines, coffee lovers have a reason to celebrate their favorite beverage. 2 new studies, both published in the Annals of Internal Medicine, confirm that coffee drinkers live longer. The first study included more than 500,000 people in 10 European countries. During the 16 years of the study, people who reported drinking the most coffee were significantly less likely to die than those who drank the least. The longevity advantage for men was 12%, and for women it was 7%. Coffee drinkers were less likely to die of digestive diseases. In addition, the women who consumed the most coffee were less likely to die of cardiovascular causes. They were more susceptible to ovarian cancer, however. Another study published in the same issue looked at coffee drinking in the U.S. A multi-ethnic cohort included 185,000 middle-aged African Americans, Native Hawaiians, Japanese Americans, and Latinos, as well as whites. Compared to no coffee, those who drank 2 or more cups daily were 18% less likely to die during the 16-year study. Caffeinated and decaf coffee appeared to have the same effect. An editorial in the same journal concludes that moderate coffee intake can be part of a healthy diet. The editorialists caution that sugar, cream, or cream substitutes can add calories and might interfere with the benefits. They warn that it's premature to recommend that people drink coffee, but those of us who do should not feel guilty about our Java habit.
What do you do for a sunburn? A new study from Case Western Reserve University suggests that someday you may want to pop a vitamin D pill. In this trial, 20 volunteers got an experimental sunburn on their inner arm by exposing it to an ultraviolet lamp. An hour later, the participants took pills, placebo, or 3 different doses of vitamin D3, 50,000, 100,000, or 200,000 IUs. The researchers checked the sunburns 1, 2, and 3 days later, as well as a week afterward. People who took the highest dose of vitamin D3 had significantly less skin inflammation after 2 days. Their sunburn was less red, and their skin cells had more genes activated for repair. That was apparently due to higher levels of an enzyme called arginase 1 that's important in helping skin heal.
Recent research from South Korea raises the unsettling prospect that an attack of shingles is not only painful, but scary. Shingles, known medically as herpes zoster, is a one-sided rash that may appear decades after a person had chickenpox. The varicella zoster virus responsible for chickenpox gets reactivated and causes a very painful outbreak in a single line or on only one side of the body or the face. Now, however, physicians may need to consider an attack of shingles as a red flag. The Korean researchers titled their report, "Herpes zoster increases the risk of stroke and myocardial infarction." They used records from the South Korea National Health Insurance Service between 2003 and 2013. There were over 500,000 people in the group they examined. During that time, 23,213 people developed shingles. The scientists matched these patients to others who served as control subjects. People who had shingles were 41% more likely to experience a heart attack or stroke. The risk of stroke rose by 35%. That of heart attack soared by 59%. The investigators don't know why shingles is linked to a risk of heart attack. They suggest, however, that primary care physicians whose patients experience a shingles attack should be alert for other cardiovascular risk factors that could be controlled.
Children who spend more time playing outside are less likely to become nearsighted. That's the conclusion from a study of 5,700 Dutch youngsters who were followed from birth to age 6. The researchers analyzed multiple factors, including household income, parental education, and children's activities. When the kids were 6, they got a complete medical and eye exam. 137 of them were diagnosed with myopia. These children had spent more time indoors and spent less time playing sports than the kids with normal vision. In addition, myopic children had lower vitamin D levels and higher body mass index. The authors conclude that environmental factors, especially time outdoors, have an important impact on children's vision. And that's the health news from the People's Pharmacy this week. Welcome to the People's Pharmacy. I'm Joe Graydon. I'm a pharmacologist.
And I'm Terry Graydon. I'm a medical anthropologist. Today we're talking about the health news that matters to you. Our lines are open for your questions, comments, and stories about red yeast rice, cholesterol control, and statins. Later, we'll hear from Dr. Jordan Petya about why dogs can be helpful in a household with a baby. Do you have a story about a dog? Join the conversation at 888-472-3366 or email us, radio@peoplespharmacy.com. You can also reach us through Twitter. We're at People's Pharmacy, or find us on Facebook. Share your own story about red yeast rice or statins at 888-472-3366.
To get the lowdown on red yeast rice, we turn to Dr. Todd Cooperman. He's founder and president of ConsumerLab.com, an organization devoted to testing nutritional supplements so that you can know what's in those pills.
Welcome back to the People's Pharmacy, Dr. Todd Cooperman.
Thanks for having me on again, Terry and Joe.
Well, we always appreciate your perspective, especially when it comes to dietary supplements. And today I'd like to talk about red yeast rice. I mean, the history of this compound is fascinating. It goes back over 1,000 years to China.
Yeah, it is also the basis for the statins that we use today because these special yeast, which are grown on rice and develop this red color, are actually producing statins. They're known as monocolins or mevacolins, but they are producing the statins that eventually became the widespread prescription drugs that we use today. Mevacor, one of the earlier statins, actually has the exact same compound, monocolin K, that is produced by these red yeast rice. They also produce a range of other related compounds which may also have activity.
Right. Mevacor, of course, being lovastatin. And what I find really fascinating about this is that red yeast rice has been used in China, as I said, for a very long time, both medicinally for circulation, but also as a foodstuff. People actually like the way it tastes.
Right, and it's only really been, in more recent years, obviously, that we've been looking at the cholesterol-lowering effect, that these definitely have.
Well, quite recently, red yeast rice has hit the news because of an article published in the European Journal of Preventive Cardiology. A Harvard researcher looked at a bunch of over-the-counter red yeast rice supplements and had them analyzed, and he says, you have no idea what's in that supplement jar.
And that doesn't come as news to you, does it?
Not at all. A Consumer Lab has been looking at red yeast rice for a number of years. It's a very unique supplement in that, well, first of all, it's one of the supplements that clearly can have a powerful effect and a beneficial effect there's no disputing that these compounds found in red yeast rice can be very powerful and lower your cholesterol significantly, 20, 30%. The problem, and the reason why Consumer Lab we've been looking at it for many years, is you have no idea about the amount and the potency of the red yeast rice that you buy, because nearly every product will say the same thing. They'll say 600 milligrams typically of red yeast rice per capsule, but that tells you nothing about the actual amount of statin compounds that are in there. And since statins are prescription, the FDA won't allow supplement companies to actually show the amount of statins that they contain. Otherwise, they'd be considered drugs, and they would have to be removed from the market. So there's a catch-22 that goes on with red yeast rice supplements, which has made it kind of one of the perfect areas for Consumer Lab to go in and do our work, because we're the group that's out there buying products and telling people what's really inside them. So we've known for a long time that there are very potent red yeast rice products. There are some that have virtually no active ingredient in them. There are some that are even contaminated, and there's everything in between.
Well, speaking of the contaminant, you have reported that, and I don't know how it's pronounced, is it citrinin or citrinin?
Citrinin,
Citrinin
right?
is one of that, possible contaminants, and that's not a good thing because it's a potential toxin.
Right, it's a potential kidney toxin. When red yeast rice grows in the incorrect manner, it will actually produce the citrinin rather than producing the statins. And so you typically find that products that are low in the active compound may be high in the toxin. So that's kind of the worst of both worlds. And we have seen that happen with some supplements as well. And again, you would have no idea, from the label. And another thing that is going on is that, to just play it very safe with the FDA, some companies, some very otherwise reputable companies out there, are producing and selling red yeast rice products that really have nothing in them in terms of, they actually may have some red yeast rice in them, but none of the active compound, perhaps to stay away from any contention, with the FDA, but really doing a disservice to consumers.
Right, because anyone who's taking red yeast rice is expecting that it will lower their cholesterol, right?
Exactly. And some good clinical studies have been done with red yeast rice products. These were products that had been tested. In fact, clinical studies that are out there have often been tested by us. The investigators have come to Consumer Lab just to make sure that they know what they're working with in these clinical studies, and they do work quite well. There's even a hint that they may be less likely to cause muscle pain and damage than other statins, possibly because of kind of a synergy between different compounds that are in the red yeast rice, as opposed to just using a much higher dose of just one of the statin compounds.
Well, what I find really intriguing is, very reputable journals have published these articles. I mean, there are some physicians who go, well, never take a dietary supplement. You need to get a prescription drug. That's the way to go. But in the Journal of Clinical Pharmacology and Therapeutics, there's an article on red yeast rice comparing it to simvastatin, and it basically says they produce similar lipid-lowering effects. And an article quite recently in BMC Cardiovascular Disorders says red yeast rice induces less muscle fatigue symptom than simvastatin, and basically produces the same benefits. So just as good, not as dangerous. So how can people use red yeast rice from a reputable company and get the desired results that their physicians are looking for when it comes to lipid levels? Can you give us some brands?
Sure. Let me get into that a little bit. And I should mention in the most recent study, which was not by us, but was by these investigators up in Boston, they did not identify the brands. However, we did go through their list to try to get a sense as to how that matched up with our own results. And my guess is that the product that had the highest amount of statin, and the statin here is called monocolin K, by the way. There also is another active compound called monocolin Ka, a very similar compound. These investigators in Boston did not look for Ka, but it can represent as much as 70%, or it'd be equal to about 70% of the amount of monocolon K. So you could be getting a lot more than they were showing in this report. But a product that tends to have the highest levels of the statins is a product called cholesterol. It ends in ENE. And I believe in their report they may have tested that as well.
How do you spell that?
It's spelled similar to cholesterol, but a cholesterol. CHOLESTENE.
Okay. Any others?
I would, based on their report, I would, and our own, that would be probably my top choice. We are actually in the process right now at Consumer Lab of testing a whole new slew of these red yeast rice products that we're just buying off the shelves. Later this year, we'll have a full report on the latest results. And it is important to try to keep track of the latest results because these can vary over time. We've seen that happen. The same brand can have it's tended to kind of go down over time in terms of how potent these are. But I would say if I were to choose one product right now, that would be the one. And it can be just as potent as a kind of a normal dose of Mevacor.
So your recommendations to our listeners?
One, first of all, if you're more comfortable using a prescription drug and that's working for you especially, I would stick with that because there you know every time what you're getting. With red yeast rice, there's not only huge variability across the brands, but there can even be variability, from lot to lot because it is a natural product. But if you do want to try red yeast rice and you've had muscle pain in the past and maybe you want to try this to try to avoid that, and again, there's no guarantee you can get muscle pain, but seems to be a lesser occurrence of it with the red yeast rice, then I would try the cholesterol or it's called HPF cholesterol. That one tends to have the highest amount of lovastatins. Another one you could consider would be Nature's Plus Herbal Actives or red yeast rice. That one also had a significant amount, about a third the level of the cholesterol. Again, these were based on our last study of red yeast rice. Again, I would, stay tuned for what we find later this year.
Absolutely. And of course, you should let your doctor know that you're taking this.
You should definitely let your doctor know, and do not take it along with another statin drug. If you're already on a statin, don't add this to it. That'll just add like a variable that you're unsure of. Oh, and in terms of the citrinin, again, I would just be concerned because there are products out there that do have the citrinin. It's typically low levels, but it's something you just don't want. And it is in products that typically have very little of the statin drug in there.
Dr. Todd Cooperman, thank you so much for talking with us on the People's Pharmacy today.
Yeah, always my pleasure. Thanks.
You've been listening to Dr. Todd Cooperman, founder and president of ConsumerLab.com and PharmacyChecker.com. We have a link to his website from peoplespharmacy.com.
What are you doing to reduce your risk of heart disease? Have you experienced side effects with statins? What about red yeast rice? After the break, we'll take your calls about statins and non-drug approaches to heart health.
Share your story about red yeast rice and statins. How well did they work? Have you ever experienced side effects from either one?
Ask a question about cholesterol control. Our lines are open at 888-472-3366. We're at email, radio@peoplespharmacy.com. Again, the number, 888-472-3366.
You're listening to The People's Pharmacy with Joe and Terry Graydon.
If you like this podcast of The People's Pharmacy and want to continue the conversation, you can join us online at facebook.com/People's Pharmacy to share your thoughts or comments.
Welcome back to the People's Pharmacy. I'm Terry Graydon.
And I'm Joe Graydon. The People's Pharmacy is made possible in part by Red X Industries, makers of utterly smooth creams and lotions that moisturize deeply to make dry skin feel soft and smooth. Their number 800 345-7339. The website is uttercream.com.
If you would like to purchase a CD of this show, you can call 800-732-2334. It's show number 1086. Or you can also find it on our website, peoplespharmacy.com.
Today we're talking about cholesterol control with statins, red yeast rice, or vinegar, or even cinnamon. We invite you to ask a question or share your story about what's worked for you. Our lines are open at 888-472-3366. You can email us. We're radio@peoplespharmacy.com. We're also available via Twitter, and you can reach us on Facebook today. Again, that phone number, if you'd like to join the conversation and share your story about statins or red yeast rice, is 888-472-3366.
Joe, something popped up in my Twitter feed today, and it says that statins only improve your heart attack survival by about 4 days if you take a statin every day for 5 years after your heart attack. So now I have to tell you, it came from that well-known medical source, the Daily Mail. It appears to have been pulled...
I think your tongue was in your cheek. Yeah.
It appears to have been pulled from some medical journal, but I don't know which one because they didn't cite it. But they do say taking a daily statin they do say that the researchers suggest that instead heart attack survivors should aim on diet and exercise, which have been proven to improve heart attack survival.
Right, but no one who has had a heart attack should ever stop taking their statin without very careful conversation with their prescriber, cardiologist, and any other physician or health professional who's on the team.
Exactly right. And of course, we should say that red yeast rice would not be any more helpful than a statin in a situation like that.
Absolutely. We do have an email. This is from Jan, who says, for years, my doctor told me my cholesterol was too high. I was put on first one medicine and then another. Over time, I think I tried every known medicine for cholesterol, all with the same problems: aches and pains in my feet, legs, and hands, as well as memory problems. When I learned about red yeast rice, I decided to try it. Have been taking it for 10 years or so and have never had a problem with it. Had a checkup in January with a new doctor I'm now seeing. After doing blood work, she announced that my cholesterol is very good. I use a brand that is, in fact, tested by consumerlab.com.
And we've got an email from Beverly. My experience with red yeast rice was that it was totally ineffective. I've been taking a very mild dose of a prescription statin for more than 15 years. That keeps my cholesterol within normal limits. I'm grateful I've had no side effects and no strokes.
So there's a lot of variability.
There is indeed.
And the only thing that people can do when they're taking dietary supplements is monitor their blood cholesterol levels and see whether or not they're working. We got an email, Terry, the other day from someone who was really outraged because he said, well, I couldn't afford to go to my doctor. And so I decided that my elevated blood sugar levels, I was borderline, I'll just treat them with dietary supplements. And so he used ginger and he used cinnamon and
all kinds of things that can lower blood sugar but don't always, and did not monitor apparently the blood sugar, because at some point he was hospitalized for a different emergency, and his HbA1c, which is a measure of how your blood sugar is doing over time, was very high, like 11.
And he suffered some pretty serious complications of diabetes. So just to say, oh, well, I'm taking dietary supplements, everything's fine.
No, that's not the right approach. Dietary supplements can be helpful, but you need to use them wisely and in conjunction with medical care.
Now, here's a really interesting article that just came across our desk. This has to do with the effects of melatonin on elevated liver enzymes during statin treatment. And this was published in Biomedical Research International. And I don't think a lot of people realize that sometimes liver enzymes can go up on statins. So there's what we would call a hepatotoxic effect. It can damage the liver a bit. And that's usually detectable within a relatively short period of time, but it needs to be monitored. Well, it turns out that when they gave these people melatonin, 5 milligrams twice a day, that it prevented this liver enzyme elevation, which was very cool. So the idea that a natural substance could actually prevent a side effect from a medication, I'm kind of intrigued by that.
I think that is pretty interesting. And Joe, we've got an email from Barry who says, I used red yeast rice for about a year to help lower cholesterol. I had no muscle pain, but I was turned down from insurance because a blood test found mildly elevated liver enzymes. After stopping the supplement, the liver tests returned to normal in just a few weeks, and I was able to get the insurance I applied for. I always prefer a natural remedy when one's available, but we all need to remember that just because a chemical occurs in nature, that doesn't mean it will always be harmless.
And here's a message from Alan in Kentucky. He says, the physician who does my annual medical surveillance exam wellness physical suggested that I take red yeast rice, which is kind of interesting. So here's a physician who is recommending red yeast rice. Mm-hmm. He says, when I investigated, I found an article that reported that the brands sold have varying quantities of active ingredients, and most were contaminated with the compound, and how is that pronounced, Terry?
Citrinin.
A nephrotoxin and mutagen, and that means it's a kidney toxin. The best tested brand doesn't seem to be sold anymore. Do you have any suggestions for finding a brand that is both safe and effective? And what was the brand that Dr. Cooperman mentioned?
The brand that Dr. Cooperman was talking about is called Cholestine, Cholestene. And I would recommend that when ConsumerLab.com's report comes out in, I don't know, a month or 2 months or 3 months, so sometime soon, that we peruse that very carefully and see which brands then are really up to snuff.
Absolutely.
Joe, there is research that shows that red yeast rice is less likely to cause muscle fatigue and other muscle symptoms than simvastatin, although it lowered cholesterol just as much. And this was published in BMC, Cardiovascular Disorders, quite recently.
Very interesting indeed. You know, this idea that statins can cause muscle fatigue and muscle pain is something that a lot of doctors are a little bit unclear about. And yet there was a recent study suggesting that when doctors are given statins and they develop muscle fatigue and pain, that's when they take it much more seriously. So if you experience it yourself, you believe that it really exists. Do we have a call, Terry?
We do. Let's talk to Doug in Nightdale. Doug, welcome to the People's Pharmacy. Your experience.
Hello, it's a pleasure. My question is concerning how to make the transfer of dosage. I'm Tecastatin. I'm the generic of Lipitor, 80 milligrams a day. I'm reasonably well controlled with my cholesterol, but I'm also diabetic. I'm on a pump. I do well with that, or reasonably well. But how to start making the transfer? You know, I take 80 milligrams. How do I transfer or try to transfer over to the red yeast rice? That's hard to say.
Well, you know, Doug, do you even need to make a transfer? Because if you're tolerating 80 milligrams, which is a pretty big dose, and it's doing what it needs to be done, maybe you don't need to transfer, because red yeast rice is going to be very hard to achieve that level of statin. That is substantially higher than anything you will find over the counter.
Okay.
For a couple reasons.
With the diabetes, I was always concerned with the statins and try to pay attention. And you guys have discussed that in the past.
We have. How is your blood sugar being controlled? I'm curious.
I use an insulin. I use an insulin pump, and I do okay with the pump. But it's always you take a lot of insulin and try to manage it the best you can. Getting the statin out of me, could that potentially help me out? Is what I was curious about.
Well, if there were a way to stop the statin altogether, which I think is not likely, given that your cholesterol control at this point requires a potent statin, atorvastatin, and a high dose of it, red yeast rice is a statin. And so if you and your doctor decided you should switch over to red yeast rice, you'd still be getting that statin side effect, and people can still have elevated blood sugars on red yeast rice.
You may be in a situation where you are stuck with the statin.
And I do tolerate it reasonably well. I have tried, I forget the next brand up, I forget, but that one I did not tolerate with the muscle pain, but the 80 milligrams of the generic Lipitor, I do tolerate reasonably well.
Right, so you're on atorvastatin, is that right?
Yes, atorvastatin, thank you.
And, the only thing you might want to ask your doctor about is whether or not coenzyme Q10 would be appropriate in your case. Some people report that it helps ease or prevent the muscle pain and fatigue that is so common. Others say it doesn't do a thing. So it's kind of, you'd have to try it out and see whether it works or not.
The CQ10 does help me.
Okay.
I have been on that on a couple of years.
Very good.
Terrific. Thank you so much for the call.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Let's go to line 1, and that looks like a physician. David, where are you from, David?
St. Petersburg, Florida.
David, welcome to the People's Pharmacy. You are a surgeon. What's your story?
Well, I'm a neurosurgeon. I've had 2 heart attacks, which were just ischemic events that both required stents with no damage, thank God. And I got put on very high-dose statins, and we tried for a year or 2, but I had such terrible muscle aches, and you're right, doctors need to experience their symptoms to really appreciate them. It was so bad that it was threatening my kidney function. My muscles were getting destroyed. And so no matter what I did, no matter what doses and what combinations, nothing would work without side effects. It would lower my cholesterol. I looked at red yeast rice and decided it was so unreliable and the doses weren't really accurate that I wasn't even going to try it. And but I have been losing weight. I'm down almost 55 pounds. I'm exercising, and that has had about a 15% improvement in my cholesterol. But I will say this, I don't believe the cholesterol theory anyway. I think it's really not proven in science. I think the number needed to treat is way too high to produce a benefit, and I think you need to look at other approaches besides cholesterol lowering.
Well, David, we're not going to argue with you because we are singing from the same hymnal, more or less, but do explain what you mean by the number needed to treat is too high.
Well, if you look at science, if you do it properly, they'll always say, well, gee, we had a 50% reduction in people with this side effect or with this disease, or 50% improvement in this benefit. Well, when you break down the numbers, if you do it a better way, you come up with, well, if you treat 5,000 people, then maybe 20 of them will do better than another group of people. And if you crunch some numbers, you can produce through statistics a 50% improvement, when really all you've done is improve the lives of 10 people in one group or 20 people in one group versus not improving the lives of 40 people in another group. And they'll say, well, that's a 50% change. So you've got to see, are you part of a population or are you an individual? If we go down the population health, you can make a population look better, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's any good for you.
Well, Dr. David, I have to tell you, we really appreciate your call, and I think the message that you have sent today is one that we have heard from Dr. Rita Redberg not too long ago. She is the editor-in-chief of JAMA Internal Medicine. She's a cardiologist at the University of California, San Francisco, and basically she confirms what you've said, and that is diet, exercise, and lifestyle in general can make a huge difference in your risk of having another heart event and also in your ability to get your cholesterol down. So thank you very much for sharing that message.
You're welcome.
Bye-bye.
Joe, we've got an email from Julie in Front Royal, Virginia, more or less along the same lines. She says, I'm listening to your show about red yeast rice. It sounds like we're discussing it as a lab value, presumably the cholesterol. Has anyone researched whether red yeast rice actually prevents cardiac events? Statins don't seem to work well for much beyond making your cholesterol lower. What about red yeast rice? I don't know of any studies of red yeast rice that actually looked at heart attacks, strokes, or overall survival. Do you?
I don't.
There might be some. We just may not have seen them.
But it would be expensive, and it's...
As a trial.
And you can't patent red yeast rice. It's been used for over 1,000 years in China. And it's unlikely that anyone would spend the tens of millions of dollars to produce such results.
So the answer to you, Julie, is we don't know. We don't know whether red yeast rice would prevent any heart attacks or strokes, or, but it's not likely that it's going to be substantially better than a statin in that respect, right, Joe?
That's right. And we have to remind people that red yeast rice can also cause side effects. For example, here's Barry. He says, I used red yeast rice for about a year.
We already took care of Barry.
Took his, and he had those liver enzyme elevations.
Right.
And some people experience muscle pain and fatigue on red yeast rice as well as on statins.
Absolutely. Red yeast rice can cause side effects, and people need to be aware of that.
We have one last call. We don't have a lot of time before the break, but here we go. We're talking to...
June.
And where are you, June?
I'm in Texas.
June, we have just less than a minute. What's your story?
I have a healthy lifestyle. I've just had a cholesterol test. My low-density cholesterol is 164, and my high-density cholesterol is 78.
Wow, that's great.
My doctor has recommended statins. I prefer not to. Can I take red rice and lower my low-density cholesterol without lowering the high-density?
Oh, that's a great question, and I don't know the answer for sure. It will lower your low-density cholesterol. It might lower the HDL as well a little bit.
And your HDL, your so-called good cholesterol, is so good, we'd hate to see that come down. But hey, the good news is you can monitor your progress. So you can go in and ask your physician for blood tests if you make that switch over and see how the red yeast rice is affecting your blood lipids. So you can get a report card. How about that?
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'll do that.
Thank you for
Good
calling,
luck, June.
We really appreciate it. We are going to take a short break, but when we come back, Terry, we're going to find out why dogs are good for babies' health.
Dr. Jordan Petya, we're going to talk to him. He's professor of environmental engineering at Yale University. He'll tell us how dogs alter the microbiome in our homes. How does that affect human health?
Like maybe probiotics, dogs as probiotics. Well, we invite you to join the conversation. Share your own story about how your pets have affected your health. Our lines are open at 888-472-3366. You can reach us via email, radio@peoplespharmacy.com, or call again that number, 888-472-3366.
You're listening to The People's Pharmacy with Joe and Terry Graydon. If you value the health information you get when you listen to The People's Pharmacy, consider subscribing to our email newsletter. You'll get the latest health news and information on upcoming podcasts delivered to your inbox twice a week. Look for the link at peoplespharmacy.com.
Welcome back to the People's Pharmacy. I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon. The People's Pharmacy is made possible in part by Red X Industries, makers of Utterly Smooth creams and lotions, helping dry, cracked skin feel utterly soft and smooth. 800-345-7339. The website is uttercream.com.
If you'd like to purchase a CD of this show, you can call 800-732-2334. Today's show is 1086, or visit our website. It's peoplespharmacy.com.
Today, we're talking about the health news that matters to you. We've been discussing red yeast rice and whether it can be used instead of a statin. But let's shift to a new topic now. We've been hearing about the hygiene hypothesis for quite some time. That's the idea that exposing a developing immune system to a wide range of microbes can reduce the likelihood of allergies or asthma later in life. But most of the studies have looked at kids on farms.
Is there a way for city kids to get the immune system training in the first year of life? To find out, we're talking with Dr. Jordan Petya. He is professor of environmental engineering at Yale University and director of environmental undergraduate studies in engineering. He has some data on dogs.
Welcome to the People's Pharmacy, Dr. Jordan Petya.
Thank you very much. It's nice to be here.
We are delighted to have you with us, and we are absolutely intrigued with your research because we've been following the hygiene hypothesis for, it must be more than 10 or 15 years now. Can you explain to us, number one, how you got interested as an environmental engineer in pets?
That's a great question. Many people in my profession, and traditionally, we looked at water and sanitation. That is, drinking water, wastewater, air pollution as well. A section of people who are environmental engineers look at pathogens and microbes in the environment and human exposure to these microbes. It's not usual for environmental engineers to go indoors, but indoors is really the environment that we live in. We spend more than 90% of our time in buildings. And so our exposures to chemicals and microorganisms are really exposures that occur indoors. And given that there's much less known about the microbiology of your house, of your couch, of your sink, of your countertops, and of the air in your bedroom than there is of drinking water and wastewater, I thought it's an interesting and important area to study.
Well, what little we have learned about the microbiology of your kitchen counter or your sink is scary.
Sometimes, there are certainly pathogens all around us, and there are certainly many opportunities to expose and get sick. Even though we don't always know where they come from, we get maybe 3-4 respiratory infections a year. If you have children, probably significantly more. But another important point to think about is that we live with microorganisms where we have more microbial cells on our body than we have human cells. And most of the microbes out there aren't bad for us. Many of them are neutral. Some of them are potentially helpful.
Well, it fascinates me, Dr. Petya, that for the last 50 years or so, Americans have been convinced, but mostly I think by manufacturers of products of a variety, from soaps and disinfectants and toothpaste and goodness knows what else, that we need to be at war with germs. And so, we have all kinds of disinfectants and there's stuff that you can put on your countertops to kill off all of the stuff that's out there waiting to harm you. And we worry about, as Terry said, our sinks and our countertops and all the rest of it. And yet, as you've pointed out, this stuff has been living with humans for, thousands, tens of thousands of years. How important are those bugs for our general health? And have we kind of gotten carried away with disinfecting everything in sight?
Well, those microorganisms are very important for our general health, but that's an area we're just really starting to understand. And if you go all the way back to infectious disease and Koch's postulates, if a person has a disease, if a population is presenting with something like tuberculosis, it's a relatively logical and straightforward path to trying to find a single causative agent of that, where you can find Mycobacterium tuberculosis causes this disease. Therefore, if we eliminate that, then the disease can go away and you can prevent it. It's a much more circuitous path to finding the microorganisms that are benefiting our health. if you feel all right today, it's hard to sort of say, well, what are the microbes that are making you feel okay? It's easy to find the microbes that make us sick, much more difficult to find the ones that make us well. We're starting to unravel that now because we have genetic methods, and with the increase in easiness and low cost of DNA sequencing, we can just sequence DNA on surfaces, on towels and bathrooms and in indoor air, and we can get full lists of all the microorganisms there. And in cases where we do epidemiology studies, say, for example, where children have asthma, we can also look at the control cases where children don't have asthma. And often, microorganisms will pop out or will stand out as in higher concentrations in cases where children are healthy. So we're starting to unravel that.
One of the fascinating findings is that children who are exposed to farmyard animals, for example, early in life, before their first birthday, are less likely to develop asthma. How do we explain that?
There's a few hypotheses to explain that. I don't think we have a full explanation yet, but we know that the effect is strong, and it's absolutely correct to say that it has to be in the first year of life or early in life. The hypotheses have mostly focused and settled on exposure to microorganisms in that first year of life and the development of immune systems. There's a lot of research that suggests, well, perhaps it's just being exposed to a diversity of microorganisms. It doesn't really matter which type of bacteria or fungi you're exposed to, just as long as you're exposed to a large diversity of them. And the idea there is that helps train our immune system because it sees many more different types of organisms and many more different types of molecular patterns or chemicals on those organisms. Some say that maybe it's not just the diversity, that there's specific microorganisms that are associated with these barnyard animals. And we have a few candidate lists, but nothing so far really sticks out. But we think it's the microorganisms that's playing an important role in prevention of asthma.
Well, most American families don't live on or near farms, so most babies aren't going to be exposed to barnyard animals. What about other animals? Can pets have benefit?
Pets can have benefits, and again, most of the benefits that are understood focus on this first year of life and early life exposure. And so there is significant epidemiology data to say that having a cat or dog in a home in the first year of life reduces the risk of allergies and asthma.
There was a fascinating article in the New York Times not too long ago, and its headline was, "Are Pets the New Probiotic?" And, of course, you were quoted in that article. Can you tell us a little bit about this concept of pets and probiotics, please?
I think it's, Joe, I think it's just very similar to what Terry mentioned in her last question, and that is we're not all going to live on farms. And, in fact, we're not all going to live on Amish farms where we live in close proximity to animals. And so we have to get our microbial exposures somewhere. And one way to do that is to have pets in our homes. In fact, if you go through different homes, if you look at hundreds of homes in different areas, and you sequence the DNA and you get an understanding of what the microbial communities are in the homes, and then you start to look at what are the factors that impact the microbial communities in the home. Is it how many people live in the home? Is it how well the home is ventilated? One thing really, really stands out, and that is pet ownership. That's sort of a big signal. That is, in experiments performed at the University of Colorado and North Carolina State, they looked at the dust on TV screens. Presumably the dogs aren't licking the TV screens, but probably in some cases they are. But in these cases, they found that in homes with dogs, there was a significantly different microbial community on those TV screens versus homes without dogs.
You know, I've heard people go, can you believe Mrs. Jones? I mean, she lets her dog sleep in bed with her. Oh, gross. And there are a lot of people who like to have their dogs snuggle up or wake them up in the morning. And, you know, of course, dogs are not as hygienic. I mean, we actually have a dog who loves to eat poop, as a for example. And so the idea that they're spreading around their germs and the other stuff that they collect on their paws and their tails and their fur, and then they're snuggling up to you. It sounds like people might be exposed to a lot of stuff, and a lot of these folks are not getting sick. They're not developing gastroenteritis as a result of it. Your thoughts?
That's right. We don't know for sure if it's, the poop that they're eating or stepping in or the garbage they're digging in, if those are the important microbes that they're bringing into our homes, or if it's just the microbes that are naturally growing on their skin that's important to us. So that has not been separated out. But beyond dogs transferring their microbes to us or seeding our house with beneficial microbes, there's an awful lot of other benefits of having dogs, like you've mentioned.
Well, there are. I mean, it's great to have dogs. There's always the exercise factor. People who have dogs get more exercise because they walk their dogs. Is there a way to balance the benefits of having dogs with the potential downsides of having them bring some of those bacteria that we might not want into the house?
There are some potential downsides for sure. And the microorganisms that you don't want dogs to bring in the house, I'm not sure if that necessarily qualifies as a public health crisis yet. And I would also say that, having a house that's clean and performing constant cleaning in your home isn't as bad as what some who I think misread the hygiene hypothesis think. And so I would say that appropriate cleaning of your home still with a dog is important. But there's some other downsides to having a dog that I think should give us all pause if you want to, if some are saying, the obvious advice is go out and get a dog, your children will be healthy. And that is the first thing to note is that, again, the effects are only in the first year of life or early on in life. Secondly, if you have children in a home that are allergic to dogs, it is a very bad idea to get a dog. And third is that dogs produce allergens, right? Dog dander, cat dander as well. These are allergens, just like cockroach allergens and dust mite allergens, and we know that a pathway to allergy development is through sensitization. It hasn't been completely worked out whether having a dog also is a strong sensitizer to dog allergens and a strong factor in producing allergies, mostly because there's often other allergens in a home and it's hard to separate out which is important. But a lot of allergists don't go right out and suggest to get a dog right now because the role of dogs in causing allergies has not yet been clearly worked out.
So, Dr. Pescia, what should we make of your research? How do we balance being clean but not being obsessed? The balance of good bacteria versus bad bacteria, and how do we, sort of prevent some of those autoimmune diseases that have become so common in recent years, especially in metropolitan areas?
Sure. I think the message that we can say clearly from our research, this is still early days, is that let's not think about it so much as a hygiene hypothesis. There's different names that are out there. One that I like for it is called the old friends hypothesis. And that is our immune systems are perhaps not developing properly because we're missing our old friends. Our old friends are microbes that we get from our mothers. There are microbes that we get from animals. There are microbes that we get from the outside. And there are potentially some of these low-level parasite infections as well. We probably don't want to go back to the low-level parasite infections, although, as I'm sure you know, some people have thought about it. But any microbial exposure that we can bring to a diverse outdoor environment is important. And so that includes opening up your homes and your buildings, trying to ventilate as much as you can. Pet ownership is a good idea as well, and the benefits show that it's early in life, and as long as you don't have allergies or genetic propensity for allergies in your families, that's likely a good idea as well. So I think there are some things that can be done. You don't have to make your house dirty and stop cleaning. In fact, it's a good idea to keep on cleaning your house, but open it up to the outdoor microbes instead of trying to build your own artificial microbial ecology inside.
Dr. Jordan Pescia, thank you so much for talking with us on the People's Pharmacy today.
Thank you. It's been my pleasure.
You've been listening to Dr. Jordan Petya, Professor of Environmental Engineering at Yale University and Director of Environmental Engineering undergraduate studies there.
Do you have a pet story to share? We just have a couple of minutes to take your call at 888-472-3366. Do you think your pet has helped your allergies or hurt your allergies? We'd love to hear from you at 888-472-3366.
And we go to Julio in Dallas, Texas. Welcome to the People's Pharmacy.
Hello, Joe and Terry.
Hello, Julio.
Hi, yes. I do have a story to share with you guys. And after listening in, it makes things in perspective, puts things in perspective for me because several years ago, we were living at the time in Indiana, and my aunt, my nephew was sick at the time with asthma. He was a baby. He was a child. So we would hear these stories from back home, back because we're from Mexico originally, and we would hear stories, back in the days, and they would say an animal, a chihuahua, for example, would, cure the child, but the dog will live a shorter lifespan. And that was the story, the myth that we would hear. And she ended up getting a chihuahua for my nephew, and unbeknownst to us, a few years later, he did get better. He did cure from asthma. Well, got way better, but the dog still lived. But growing up, we would hear that the dog would absorb the illness of the child, and the dog would have a shorter lifespan. But those were stories we would hear growing up.
Well, Julio, thank you.
We really appreciate you sharing this. It is a story that we've heard before. We have checked it out. As far as we can tell, there's no scientific evidence for it.
People think it's an urban legend.
But certainly the idea that the dog's lifespan would be shortened. Chihuahuas have a fairly short lifespan anyway, I think,
right.
Because
and
they're
some
little dogs.
Children outgrow their asthma.
So it might just be coincidence, or perhaps there's something else happening here that we don't yet know about.
But it is a fascinating story, Julio, and thank you so much for sharing it today on the People's Pharmacy. Well, that is, Terry, and we have been hearing about Chihuahuas for probably 30 years.
We have been, and as I say, we did check it out, and as far as we can tell, getting a Chihuahua will not cure your child's asthma, although your child may eventually get better.
And your child might like the Chihuahua. There's that possibility.
Absolutely. And kids usually do like dogs.
We do love our pets.
Well, that is all the time we have today. Lynn Siegel produced today's show. Sophie Copeland and Kimani Hall provided technical assistance. Al Wadarski is the engineer. Dave Graydon edits our interviews.
The People's Pharmacy is produced at the studios of North Carolina Public Radio, WUNC.
The People's Pharmacy theme music is by B.J. Liederman.
To order today's show or any People's Pharmacy broadcast, you can call 800-732-2334. Today's show is 1086. You can find it on our website, peoplespharmacy.com. And when you go there, you can tell us what you think about today's show or find information on prescription drugs, herbs, and home remedies. You'll also find links to the articles we discussed.
You could subscribe to the free podcast of our show or our free email newsletter. If you listen to the podcast, we'd be grateful for a review on iTunes or wherever you pick it up. And please friend us on Facebook.
In Durham, North Carolina, I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon. Thank you for listening, and please do join us again next week.
We hope you enjoyed this podcast. If so, please consider taking a minute to write a review on iTunes. And thanks for listening to The People's Pharmacy.
We interrupt this program to bring you an important Wayfair message. Wayfair's got style tips for every home. This is Nicole Byer, helping you make those rooms flyer. Today's style tip: when it comes to making a statement, treat bold patterns like neutrals. Go wild! Like an untamed animal print area rug under a rustic farmhouse table from Wayfair.com. Ooh, fierce! This has been your Wayfair style tip to keep those interiors superior.
Wayfair, every style, every home.